quick summary of what we said yesterday. The key point is that whilst on the one hand, you turned on the volume, right? Okay. Whilst we focus on Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam as being inspired by the Abrahamic tradition and focusing primarily or exclusively on the spiritual aspects of Islam and nubuwah, there is another dimension that is equally important, equally mentioned in the text, but given less importance for various reasons, and that is the tribal tradition of Arabia itself. And what we've been trying to do and will be doing as we move ahead, is showing how these two interact. They do interact, and you can see how they interact, and until eventually Medina itself becomes the capital, and then the Prophet ﷺ leaves the world. So hopefully we can finish all of that today. Quickly, the first capital of the Islamic polity or the Islamic empire was Medina, not Mecca. Mecca had never had a political role. Medina became the first capital. The second capital was Kufa, which Ali radiallahu anhu established. The third capital was Damascus, which Muawiyah radiallahu anhu established. And then the fourth capital was Baghdad, which the Abbasids established. Now the movement from one capital to the other had political connotations to it. You move from A to B because your power base is stronger out there. So Ali radiallahu anhu's power base was stronger in Medina than it was in Kufa, than it was in Mecca, and so on. So this is what determined the political landscape. Today we'll start with, why did Rasulullah move to Medina? This is like, prior to this moment when he made the hijrah, this was the darkest moment in the life of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. The darkest moment. Because Abu Sufyan had tried and failed to create some kind of a theological compromise. By theological compromise, it means you worship your God, and for 1 year we would worship our God. Remember that? He says, let's kind of work together. After all, Makkah is a place where faiths come together. It's a place where, let's work together. And Rasulullah says, no. قُلْ يَا أَيُّهَا الْكَافِرُونَ. Remember the surah? This is what it points to. قُلْ يَا أَيُّهَا الْكَافِرُونَ لَا أَعْبُدُ مَا تَعْبُدُونَ. I don't worship what you worship, nor do you worship what I worship. لَكُمْ دِينُكُمْ وَلِيَ دِينِ. See that? That's a line on the ground of that set them off. And so began the boycott. Did you hear about the three-year boycott? Where the Banu Hashim were boycotted. They were sent to a place called Shib Abi Talib radiallahu anhu. And the interesting there is where you see, remember, let me just put this on the board. There is the Abrahamic tradition, and then there is the Qusay tradition. Boycotting the Banu Hashim was part of which tradition then? Qusay tradition. It was part of the Qusay tradition. You see how these things kind of keep mixing together all the time. So they boycotted them. This is where those stories emerge. The poetry emerges. And it was a really horrific period. It's not 1 month. You and I have been fasting for 1 month in luxury homes, eating great food. This is 3 years of taking leather and boiling it to extract whatever protein value comes out of there. Because after a while, what happens is you run out of, this is the desert after all. So you're going to run out of whatever small plants you have there. Gone. But even in the darkest moments of American history during slavery, there were people with good hearts. So similarly, in Makkah, there were people with good hearts. So what they would do is sneak in and bring food and bring provisions. Good people. And that's how they survived. Of course, like in a game of chess, if you want to win the game, ultimately you have to drop the king. They couldn't drop the king, though, because he had backing. And his backing was Abu Talib. So although they boycotted him, they could not go that one step further. They just could not go that one step further of assassinating him. After 3 years, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, through his own miraculous way, they put up a manifesto on the wall of the Kaaba, inside the wall of the Kaaba, saying these are the rules governing the boycott. Very systematic. And when they got back to it, just when the 3-year period was ending, the thing had been eaten up. But of course, Muslims had already endured that period, that painful period. And so that period comes to an end. But I want you to focus on that, because much of our understanding of who the Prophet is, as opposed to what you will see later on, comes from that. It comes the archetype you have, the image you have of a person who wears bedraggled clothing, torn, stitched together. It comes from that, and that stays, and that's appealing. It's attractive. So this is a very important period to remember. Then the boycott comes to an end. But then Rasulullah suffers two major setbacks. His wife dies, Khadija radiallahu anha, and his uncle dies. So the protection he had on the outside, who was Abu Talib, and the comfort that he had on the inside, who was Khadija, they're gone. At that point, Rasulullah looks to the future and says, I got to get out of here. There's no one here who has my back. No one here who has my back. This is a very interesting moment in our history. So then he decides to go to Taif. Remember the trip to Taif? This takes place around the same time. He goes to Taif and is battered and bruised. It's hard to retell that story. It's hard to retell that story. And then there's the story about Adas, the little guy in the garden who offered him some fruit and things like that. And he said, Bismillah. You remember the story. This all connects at the same time. And then he comes back to Makkah. And Makkah, it gives him temporary support. I don't want to get into too many details. But eventually, word gets to him that he will be assassinated. So he puts Ali in charge and he leaves. So that was the first reason why Rasulullah had to leave. Public pressure, primarily. The human beings are human beings. If you leave them be, I told, maybe in the Jummah, I spoke about fitra. You have this natural disposition. It's when you lose that natural disposition that you suffer psychological problems. We have all kinds of names for that, right? It's sociopath and psychopath. That's when you lose your natural disposition. But a human being is naturally predisposed to be caring, to be compassionate. That's something that Allah puts inside of you. So that's primarily the reason. And of course, people then, you keep doing that, and eventually People will say, all right, let's or maybe from the other tribes as well, but ultimately it was social pressure. Shows social pressure that just said this is inhumane. You can't be doing this. And for what? The man says he must believe in one Allah. Of course, there's a consequence to that, which we spoke about yesterday, massive consequences. But ultimately, the call was for one Allah. So anyway, so Rasulullah makes the decision to leave, and he leaves. But, so there was boycott, it was the deaths of Abu Talib and Khadija, the threats, but his migration was targeted. That's an important point. He didn't simply accept refuge in any place that people gave him. He could have gone to Yemen, he could have gone to Bahrain, he could have gone elsewhere. He chose Medina as part of his bigger vision. You understand? So, and you know that from the questions he asked people. So when people, a delegation would come onto him and speak to him and says, you know, why don't you come stay with us? He says, well, where do you live? Who are your neighbors? And so on. Those were very pointed questions. Similar questions asked to everyone. And Medina was attractive because Medina was also connected to the north. Medina already had a culture of monotheism. There were Jews there. And personally, Medina was his ancestral homeland from his mother's side of the family. So, you know, these things combined made Medina attractive to him. So he went to Madinatul Munawwara, migrated. Small group of people migrated. I want you to focus on this. Small group of people. Everywhere you look at any incident taking place, always factor in small group of people. Because that would talk about how the odds were turned in his favor. All right? So we went to Medina. If you take this particular viewpoint, to establish a civil society. This is a very important aspect because what Rasulullah did in Medina, we take for granted today. And he could do that because he was heir to this Qusay tradition, where matters were dealt with. If you come from a small little village in the Punjab, for instance, or some part of Africa, or from the highlands of Egypt, then you would know what I'm talking about, where your political structure is pretty flat. You know, you don't have a hierarchy. You don't have a hierarchy. In America, you have a hierarchy. But the countries where that hierarchy is being flattened, very interesting, the modern world. In the modern world, the hierarchy has been almost completely flattened in a place like Finland. The Prime Minister of Finland is a professor or a high school teacher who goes to work and he comes back with his bicycle. And after 1 year, his term is up, somebody else takes over. You see how flat it is now? You understand what I mean when I say it's flat? It's unthinkable in America. And it is totally unthinkable in a Muslim context. Ours is very hierarchical. And I want you to remember that because you see it in the clearest of ways, how Rasulullah's ingenuity slowly primes him to takes the community slowly to the direction he wants to take them. He wants to take them to a direction, and he does so. Personally, I think he did it reluctantly, but it was important for him as Nabi to do this. It was important for him as this part of his life to change that, and I'll talk about that. So he does establish a civil society to have a thriving economy. Our objective here is talk about how the economy in Medina grew. It flourished. How did that happen? That's our focus. First thing he does is establish an Islamic brotherhood. The interesting thing here, and good for me, is most of you know these aspects of history. I'm just giving it a different slant. You know that Rasulullah came to Medina, and what did he do? He made him and him brother, right? And him brother. You heard about that. Common story. But that's make good economic sense. It makes good economic sense. You don't have social security there. What's going to happen to, what happens to people who come, think about it, what's happening right now? Ukraine, think about Ukraine. What happens to people who suddenly move into your area? What do you do with them? What status do you give them? Refugees, where do you park them? Outside. So he says, no. Let's create a brotherhood here. It was a refugee problem. It was dealt with differently. Obviously, their numbers are small. If I'm correct, there are about 5 to 10 million people who are moving from the Ukraine into the European countries on the other side. But nevertheless, the idea that instead of putting them on the side, create this brotherhood. And the brotherhood went far. Initially, the laws of inheritance were structured such that if he died, he would inherit. If he died and there were two brothers, then he would inherit, and so on, you understand? So even the laws of inheritance were modified so that this thing can have teeth, it can have consequences for the community. So that's what he did. It's called ta'akhi. And then he connected the muhajir, you heard this, muhajir to the ansar. And that was that was a sticking point. Getting people into your houses, not too difficult. But making muhajir and ansar equal. Brothers is one thing, but equal at different stages of our life in Medina, we see that sticking point emerging. And it became most dramatic when Rasulullah passed away. Remember what happened then? In the political discussions in the drying shed of the Banu Thaqif, who should be the new leader? So the Ansar said, someone from us. Muhajir said, someone from us. So you see that there was not a complete reconciliation there. There was not a complete reconciliation there. When Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wasallam was ready to take on the kuffar of Makkah in Badr, on the day before that battle, he made the announcement, and there was silence. And so he looked up and he says, "Yeah, I understand your silence. You have something to say about this?" And they said, "Yes," because the agreement was that Rasulullah would be protected within the precincts of Medina, not outside of it. This battle was going to take place outside. So the people of Medina had to make a choice there. Will they allow the muhajirs to go and do the fighting? And that's when the leader of the Ansar stands up and says, "Ya Rasulullah, we will not respond to you in the way that the people of Musa responded to him. اذهب وربك فقاتلا إنا هاهنا قاعدون." You go out, take your Lord with you and go do the fighting. We'll sit here and relax and wait for you to come back. So that's the point in which they converge, they come together. But the idea was to create this community, this civil society that would bring people together. And then you had the outliers. What do you do with them? And by outliers, you mean people who've just drifted in. People who got the message. They got the message in the Yemen. And they drifted into Medina. He says, what do we do with these people? You have to create that culture of brotherhood so that people can be assimilated. So that they can be assimilated. That changed later on in very dramatic ways. But initially, the Prophet ﷺ was very successful in creating this kind of a civil society. Any questions? Yes, we're coming to that now. Yes, yes. So coming back to that tribal leadership. Tribal leaderships, we said, are really very flat. So you'd have a circle in the small ones. People would sit there. There would be a chief, the sheikh, but he would not have any seniority. He would be, if there's a tie, then he would. What do they call that? He'd have the casting vote. Would push things on this direction and so on. So this was the tribal chief. This was in Arabia. But around the world at that time, you had different patterns or models of leadership. So in Rome, for instance, you had the warrior king, Caesar. Right? Caesar was a warrior king. And then in the Sasanian areas, Iran, you had the deity king, the god king. God is infused in that leader. And until recently, that was the case in one of the most advanced countries in the world. Which one is that? No, advanced country. Nice country, but not. Japan. There we go. One of the things that when was it MacArthur who signed that peace treaty? One of the things they signed on that, if it was interesting when you look at that, is the fact that he renounces any claim to deification. The emperor of Japan had to sign that I am not connected to the other world in any way. I'm just an average dude. Fascinating, isn't it? I mean, you would think that this would have died centuries ago, but actually it endures. And in the minds and the hearts of the Japanese, many of them still harbor that sentiment. That this is not just a leader. This is a God-appointed leader. Think of Jesus with political power. Man, I should go there. Really? Yeah, but it's not the same. Anyway, so that was one. So there you had the king leader, you had the warrior king, and then you had the Arab sheikh. And Rasulullah had to move himself away from that slightly. This whole movement of Rasulullah is all over in the Quran. You must just see it in that light. On the one hand, you have the Arab king, the Arab sheikh. On the other hand, you have a deified prophet. Who's that? Isa alayhi salam. So you have all of these alternative ways in which you interact with your leader. And Rasulullah starts off like all the other Arab sheikhs, and he sits on the floor with them. But then he moves up. Where does he go to? A tree stump. You heard about that story? Rasulullah first took as his mimbar a tree stump. You heard that? Sat on a tree stump. But we just take it as a sign of humility. That's a sign of empowerment. Not maybe humility, but empowerment. I am a degree above that. And that eventually ends up where? On the mimbar. So this mimbar, when you look at the mimbar and you see its political symbolism, it shows that this is the way in which Rasulullah was tribal chief to being religious leader. And from that point onwards, all the verses of the Quran think of the verses of the Quran as a a blade that sharpens the contours of his authority. You know when you're sketching something, you have this blade. So it says, "Ma Muhammad wa ma Muhammadun illa Rasul." Muhammad is only a messenger. But on the other side, it tells you what? No, inna arsalnaka shahidan wa mubashiran wa nadhira. We sent you as this. There are lots of verses that praise him. Wa innaka la ala khuluqin azim. And Muhammad is not like, how does that verse go? He's not like like anyone. So when you talk to him, walakin Rasulullah. That's number one. And then the other one is, you know the story about people go to Rasulullah's house, they say, Muhammad, ta'al, right? How's that? There's a verse for that. Which one is that? No. Don't treat Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam in the same way as you treat each other. To the extent that if you're going to him under certain circumstances, give him a gift. Offer him something. Though think of that as a blade used to sketch out the character of Rasulullah, separate from the sheikh, the village sheikh, separate from the deified king, separate from the warrior king. He's got his own persona. He's got his own persona. So all of these verses play that part. They give him a personality and a role that separates him from all the others. This is all in preparation of what is coming. Any questions? No? And then we get to the market. So when Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam gets there, there are already markets in Medina. There are 4 markets in Medina, souks. And so for a while he sees what's going on, and then he starts up his own souk. Think about this. Economics. Starts up his own souk. Ka'b ibn Ashraf was the leader of the Jews at that time. He was so annoyed. He burnt down that. He burnt it down. So Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam then decided to do something better. He took the souk. His souk was the 5th amongst 4. Right? If you want brand recognition, what do? Take it right out. That's exactly what he did. So instead of having, what's this, Farmer Jack? No, is there Farmer Jack? It's gone, still there? Farmer Jack and having Maya and all next. No. Take the one and put it right out there. Change its entire structure. That's what he did. Open market. And the rules. Every Khalifa who came in put in his own rules. All in the spirit of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. In that they almost seem to have a sense, because to my humble knowledge, I don't know Rasulullah giving them directions in this way. But they seem to sense that this is what Rasulullah was targeting. Ali comes up with a rule: first come, first served. The fact that you had your souk, your stall out there today, doesn't mean you're going to get it tomorrow. When you're done for today, you're going to pick up your stuff and get out. Tomorrow, the first person comes, he gets that. You realize that when you go into a supermarket, when you're walking down those aisles, all those commodities look like they're all the same. They're not. All of them are fighting for shelf space there. The most expensive space is the one on the left when you're leaving, when you're cashing out. You pay the most for that one. Why? Because of human habits. Impulse buying. Now we know these things. And so at that time, those people with their rudimentary understanding of basic economics and business, he says, no, you want a space, come first and you get it. You can't have special, what you call designations. You can't put up a tent within the marketplace. No. So these were all rules and regulations that were put in place in that particular souk. They kicked them out of there, or they just moved out of there. He says, fine, we'll do our own. They did their own, and before you know it, this whole thing started to flourish. So another example of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam's commercial acumen. And whereas previously, I don't know what happened afterwards, but if you had to go into one of those 4 souks, you would be paying a taxes. You know, but that's true for all of these markets. You have to pay $10 or $20 or $50 to open up a stall. I think this was just when we have these attractive initial opening freebies. So this was an opening freebie that when you come in, you don't have to pay for stall space. You come in and you get it. So these were all little things that they did in order to allow the community. And obviously, those 4 souks were dominated by the locals. The muhajirs didn't have anything. And suddenly now they have the space much bigger, and now they can also thrive as a commercial enterprise. To the point that Abdullah ibn Abdurrahman ibn Auf radiallahu anhu he had a genius for business. When he came to Medina, they also did the ta'akhi with him, and he says, you can take half my shares and all the rest of it. So he says, no thanks, may Allah reward you. Just show me where the market is. Show me where the market is so I can go there. And within a period of 2 to 3 years, when his caravan left the city, there were 700 camels. 700 camels that were marching out, all belonging to him. So these people had this knack. Some of them were brilliant in it, and they used that quite effectively. Jihad. There was always jihad in Arabia, and we call it the Qusay style jihad. It was also known as Ghazwa, and I want you to pay attention to this. The basic idea was that you enrich yourself commercially, get into business, or you enrich yourself by pillaging from other people. So you are Troy, and you're very big, and then you have Avondale. We have a small area. So if your resources are running down, what do? You simply take control of Avondale. You enslave their women, kill off their men, and enrich yourself, and it's life. That was pretty common. When you read non-Muslim historians, then they consider Rasulullah's battles as no different from the Battle of Qusay. This is where the Abrahamic comes in. And so if you read their books, even the ones who are more balanced in their approach to our history, they would say that Rasulullah engaged in the very same battles of simply enriching themselves at the expense of other tribes and other groups. And you need some mental dexterity to kind of respond to that, but it's there, because he didn't say I'm not following that tradition. It seemed to be that he's following that tradition, except for the fact that when you look around and you see why he got into a battle, why he didn't get into a battle, you see a very different picture emerging. If battles in the past were prompted because of deprivation on your side, and there was a drought, it's back. I think it's back. There was a drought, and so you needed to find funds elsewhere. Simply go to a neighbor's house, break down his door. That's basically what you're doing. You've got 5 sons and you're alone. The poor guy is just him and his wife. Go next door, just bang down his door, get out whatever he owns, get hold of the wife, enslave her, kill the husband, and that's how it was done. Every one of the Prophet's battles can be explained in ways other than that. For one, all of the battles that you look at, the initial major ones, all came to him. He didn't go to them. They came to him. So if you were out to go to your neighbor's house and destroy, it would be the other way around. Badr came to him. When he sent out a Sarya, let me just explain this to you. You have a Ghazwa, you have a Sarya, and you have a Ma'rika. A Ghazwa is where Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wasallam himself participated. A Sarya is where Rasulullah did not participate. He simply dispatched a group of people. And a Ma'rika is any kind of battle. So the unfortunate battle between Abu Sufyan, Muawiyah radiallahu anhu, and Ali radiallahu anhu is also called Ma'rika. Muslims on both sides. I think this thing is gone, huh? It's there? Okay. So when you look at Rasulullah sent a Sarya to attack the camels of Abu Sufyan because he wanted to stop that trade going north and south, and he wanted the community of the Muhajirs to be compensated for the losses they suffered when they were expelled from Mecca. But every other battle that took place is because of people engaging him, not in him engaging them. The Battle of Badr, you know, the numbers were very small, and they were very successful. How successful? Now suddenly, think about people living for 3 years in this little hovel and being deprived of even the basic requirements for survival, and now they start becoming enriched. Remember I told you Rasulullah was a multi-millionaire? Now you see that starting to happen. That starts to take off right now. The Battle of Badr, you have slaves coming in. Prisoners of war. And these prisoners of war have to be manumitted. You have to come in, your family would come in and says, you know, we have brother Shakil, and we want to free him. He says, well, it's going to cost you, dentist, right? 500 gold coins. An imam, 50 gold coins. So that's how it was. So you know what happens to those 500 gold coins? Multiply that by 700 people or 400 people. Suddenly your treasury is full to capacity. Now when we look, every battle, Allah fi sabilillah, Allahu Akbar, which we don't see the financial aspect of it. And the financial aspect, the knock-on effect was enormous. It was enormous. And think about it, it starts like this and boom. That's how much it was. We are looking at just this one part where Rasulullah and his community live a very humble life of destitution. And then you have the Battle of Badr. And even just at the Battle of Badr, the community is living comfortably. At that point already they're living comfortably. The other battles have yet to follow. And this is the promise Rasulullah made, sallallahu alaihi wasallam, made to them in Makkah. If you hold on to this, if you stay on this, if you play by this book, inshallah you will be enriched in a way that you cannot imagine. You cannot imagine. No questions? Huh. Our was. Oh yeah, they're driven by financial. Yeah, economic well-being was a key determinant, because Makkah, again, from our traditional understanding, Meccans were just stubborn kafirs and mushriks, and they were not willing to give up. No, Meccans were threatened by this, and this loss at the Battle of Badr, this just shook them up. Because there were how many people on this side? 313. And how many on that side? About 1,000, right? And you win that battle. Yeah, and they lost all their wealth, all that, all the money was gone and so on. So that really shook them. Makkah went on the defensive after the Battle of Badr. Makkah went on the defensive. And not because of their implacable enmity towards Tawheed. That might be there in the hearts of some. But for the most part, like you pointed out, their source of revenue was being stymied, was being shut off. So they had no option but to do that. They had no option but to do that. Okay? Yeah, yeah. Were you here yesterday? That answered that question, doesn't it? That's the question I posed to the rest of the class, and he's not here today. He said it's a combination of both. It's amazing to look at Rasulullah as just a human being, uninspired, and you see different aspects of his just emerge. If you take out the wahi factor and you just look at Rasulullah, a human being, you see an equally remarkable human being with amazing strategy, with amazing skills, and an ability to get to the point, to the ethical line and not cross it. Get to the ethical line. Know that, al-harbu khida'a. War is treachery. Can be, I got some news for you. By the way, at 2:30 tomorrow we'll be attacking you. That's not war. So Rasulullah wanted some information, I'm just digressing now, about the army coming in from Makkah. And so he met one of these merchants going up and down. And he didn't know who Rasulullah was. So he asked him, what do you know about these people coming from Makkah? He says, who are you? And he said, where are you from? Where are you from? Oh, no, where do you come from? Let's get it right. Where do you come from? He says, dhaka bidhak. If you tell me, I'll tell you. If you tell me, I will tell you. So he revealed everything. He says, so many people, 1,000 people coming, they have cavalry and they have marches. Gave them all the detail. He says, now, where do you come from? He said, نحن من ماء. We come from water. That's true. That is true. And remember, Al-Harbu, he's not going to share that information with him. And then the people of Makkah are going to know that Rasulullah is prepared for this. You understand? You have a question? Lots of stories about that. Ibrahim alayhi salam with his wife. There was a sheikh in India, and the British were looking for him. This was during the British. And they asked him, where is Mahmud al-Hassan? Mahmud al-Hassan, he was just here now. He was here right now. You get it? Where's Mahmud al-Hassan? I'm Mahmud al-Hassan. I'm Mahmud al-Hassan. You're going to take me to jail. And they did eventually take him to jail and locked him up in Malta for 4 years. But for that time to protect himself, he was here right now. So lots of stories like that. You have to, that's where, the key element that controls your life and my life is taqwa. It is taqwa. You have to determine if what you are doing, if you're getting close to that line, is good or not. That's for you to determine. The key element is taqwa. All the fiqh, all the hukms are in their place. But you have to, like say, istafti nafsak. You have to talk to your heart. That's a very hard thing to do, but it's also liberating. He says, I am empowered and I can make that decision. I am empowered and I can make that decision. And the higher your level of taqwa, the greater your decision-making process. So if there's one thing you should never underestimate, it's the role of taqwa in the life of a Muslim. It certainly is there to get you to where? To Jannah. But more importantly for you and I, because when you go to Jannah, the deal is done. In this world, how you interact with each other, how you buy and sell with each other, how you treat other people, are all based on your taqwa, not mine. It's not based on your hukum. It's not based on fiqh. You know what the fiqh rule is, and you can still twist it around. I can teach you 10,000 ways of never ever paying zakat. You're going to have to give me a percentage, though. You don't have to pay zakat. What is it that prevents you from applying those rules? Your taqwa. So when the Quran repeatedly brings attention to taqwa, it is talking to your heart. It is talking to your heart. Because all the rules in the world won't help if the heart is misled.
So how do you come to terms then with the Day of Judgment that Ibrahim alayhi salam is actually going to use that as a knock against him, that he didn't tell the truth about the act?
Didn't lie though.
He didn't lie, but he's saying, when everybody's saying nafsi, he actually says, I'm not one to go and use that like I actually did this, so that disqualifies me, goes to the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. So how do you come to terms with like and then you kind of playing, getting close to that line, and then at the same time, Ibrahim alayhi salam, with all of his qualities, is saying that is a disqualification
for him. That he holds himself to a higher standard. He holds himself to a higher standard. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has the highest place in Jannah for him. But that's him, he's just saying this doesn't apply to me. We have lots of examples of that also, where people hold themselves to a higher standard and it says no. Can't do that. There's wonderful stories that speak to the taqwa of an individual and how that determines his ultimate. Oh, okay. So I gave you these examples. Let me give you one other example. There's a battle called the Battle of Mu'tah, which opened the doors to Islam's interaction with the empires, which are those two empires are again quickly? The Byzantine and the Persian, or the Sasanian empires. We remember that, right? So they opened the doors to us. That's a fascinating battle. Rasulullah sends an emissary, an ambassador to the north, and along the way he was ambushed and killed. And his name was Harith radiallahu anhu. He was killed. Harith ibn Umair, by someone who was the political appointee of the Byzantine emperor. And to this day, there's one thing you never do in the political arena is kill an envoy, as opposed to 30,000. And they were being pummeled. So they put someone in charge, he gets killed, someone else in charge, he gets killed. And then they decide to put another person in charge. And that was Khalid ibn al-Walid radiallahu anhu. Now I have to say something here. And when you discuss history, we have to look at our opposing views on things. So Khalid ibn al-Walid was called Sayfullah by Rasulullah himself, the sword of Allah. He more than earned that title. But he was not perfect. Our iman and belief as Muslims of the Sunni school is that The only people who are perfect, in other words, not perfect but blameless or ma'soom, are the Anbiya. That's a very key point in our understanding of our past. For the Shia, that includes not just the Anbiya but also their Imam, Ai. So they extend that. However, like I pointed out to you yesterday, we stop short of making direct, serious accusations against the companions. We do not in any way say that they are blameless. Like I told you, go to the books of hadith, you'll find one has murdered someone, somebody got involved in something else. So we have multiple examples of companions engaging in practices that were clearly wrong. But by and large, from the Sunni perspective, this was a private matter, and that's between him and Allah. Khalid ibn Ali radiallahu anhu, during the Fath Makkah, was sent by Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wasallam, and he was asked to go and give the message of Islam to a group of people, a tribe, and he killed the leader of that tribe. And Rasulullah was very, very upset. He said, Ana bari'u min Khalid. I have nothing to do with Khalid. So there is that part. And I tell you this because you're not living in Lahore anymore. You're not living in what you call Muhandiseen anymore. You're living in America. So the guy who's sitting next to you is a Shia. And he's going to throw this at you. He says, you know, you make a big deal of Khalid. Did you know that he was so besotted by this man's wife that he killed a man? All in the name of Islam. And suddenly there's like a punch hitting you. Have you ever had that experience? Where somebody throws that at you and boom, you say, oh, where did that come from? Where did that come from? It's there. We don't talk about it in places where we come from because there's no need for it. But if you're living in a mixed community like ours and you're not prepared for this, you're going to catch it all the time. Understand one thing. African Americans in this country know full well every mark and injury they have suffered in this country's history. The white man doesn't even know that they suffered that injury because he's the perpetrator. He's the majority and he's in control. Those in control have no memory. Those who are oppressed will always remember. Shiites are always a minority. So they will bring up every piece of information out there to undermine your faith and your belief system. This is not, I'm not here to undermine Shiism. I'm simply, this is a fact. You go out there, I had hundreds of students who deal with this issue. So from experience, I know if you do not prepare people for this, it comes to them from the outside and suddenly they don't know what to do with this. Mm-hmm. Yeah. That is so true. You are so true, right about that. Spinning. This is the thing, see, this is the thing. When we teach our kids a version of Islam that is utterly sanitized, it's not good. This is a different world we live in from the world of 50 years ago, 60 years ago, 100 years ago. Knowledge is available at the click of a button. You go past someone and they're talking about Ali and Aisha radiallahu anhu's fight. How long is it going to take you to find that out? Honest to God, 3 words, Aisha versus Ali, Google. And how many others don't have that experience, that same experience? That, what do you do with this? You've created this. It's like, somebody telling you your grandfather he was the exemplar. He was the paragon of virtue. He was the best thing Allah created. And then you find out, no, he's actually just a grandfather. He's just a grandfather. He's got good in him, he's got bad in him. We in order in our, and I know there's a lot of history to this. In Saudi Arabia, there's this battle with Iran. Then there's 21%, 25% of Saudi Arabia is Shia on the east coast. In India, if not for the Mughals, cities like Lucknow would have been all Shia. So there's a certain historical sensitivity that has played into the policy of the ulama to sanitize all our history. But in this modern world, you cannot do that any longer. You cannot sanitize history. You have, and the good thing is we can deal with these things more maturely. Unfortunately, we're not doing so in many parts of the Muslim world, but we are mature enough, and I see this, where people would not lose respect for Muawiyah radiallahu anhu, notwithstanding the fact that he made errors. People have reached that point. Absolutely, absolutely, absolutely. The other thing is, if you actually examine these two people who are Aisha and Ali, it's amazing. They had a lot of differences. The biggest difference was, you know what? Love. Love. Think about it. I'll give 1 second. Love. Love is what divided them. What love? Love for who? For Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam. But despite all the differences, if Ali said black, she would say white. If Ali said black, she would say white. But the respect she had for him remained till the day she died. The respect he had for her, he showed the day she was defeated. That this is al-Mu'mineen, and she must be treated like al-Mu'mineen. So he respectfully put her back on the camel and sent her back to Makkah. So there's so much more you can learn if that history is opened up to you and you learn it maturely. And you realize, well, these are human beings, they made mistakes. But they had character because they went to the best school in the world. They were students of the best teacher in the world. And you can see that in the way they responded to issues. It settles down. I went through the same thing. I come from the same house. It's not like I was born with this capacity. I too went. I was being taught by ulama in Makkah and so on, and it was like somebody slapping you. It's literally like somebody slapping you. Then you mature. That's maturity. You mature and you realize, okay, yes. You do grow. You grow. Okay. Yeah. Okay. So you had personal experience. Good. Shattered, absolutely. Rami? When you say we mean the Muslim community, or yeah? Through serious consultations. I think it's mashallah, we've got this massive building next door, and may Allah give us the tawfiq to complete it. Right, Mr. Bhatti? Yes. But we need programs. We really need programs that would do exactly what you're saying. He's asking me, how do we reconcile what we've been taught thus far with our new realities? Is that a basic summary of? Yes. So absolutely, it takes a while. It takes a while. When we talk about Islamic banking, for instance, and people have lots of questions about Islamic banking, and why if it quacks like a duck and walks like a duck, why is it not being called a duck? In other words, just being called a bank, So we'll talk about that. But that's part of the process of reconciling, because you have this tradition that you want to bring into the 21st century in the United States, which culturally is hostile to you. It may be very friendly and give you all the rights, but they have certain rules of their own to which you have to subscribe if you want to live in this country. So that process, nobody's really doing this. It's hard work. It's hard work. It's one thing to appear on TV and on YouTube and dazzle people, but it's other to actually get into this kind of work. It's hard work. And now we move. So this is booty just coming in. We don't have much time, right? We have booty just coming in. It's coins. It's movables. Then the Battle of Khaybar takes place, and the entire situation changes. Because in Khaybar, not only do you get wealth, which is financial, but you're also taking over land. Now, the structure of distribution in the early phase was that if you have all those who participate in the battle, they share. They share in the booty. Those who contributed a horse, they get 2 shares. Those who were living in Medina but made a financial contribution, they also get a share. But ultimately, it was money they don't know what to do with it. So they distributed it in this way. Now you get to Khaybar, and you realize, what do we do with pieces of land? What do we do with these pieces of land? So they also distributed it accordingly. And we'll talk about how that was done. And then we get to Muawiyah and his genius, his brilliance. That's later. But now you understand, Khaybar changes things. Now you have land. You can't simply just give it out like that. All right? In the Quran, there are some verses that point you towards doing some things. You don't pay much attention to them, but ultimately they became the building blocks of Rasulullah's administration. إِذَا تَدَايَنْتُمْ بِدَيْنٍ إِلَى أَجَلٍ مُسَمَّى فَاكْتُبُوهُ. If you engage in any kind of a financial contract, write it down. Talking to who? Nahnu qawmun ummiyun. That's the beauty of this ayah. When Rasulullah told people that the moon should be sighted, sumu li ru'yatihi wa aftiru li ru'yatihi, then he also mentioned that you should look at the moon, and he was aware that you can actually calculate it. He was aware of that. That's why he makes the statement. Look at it, and then, because we are an unlettered community, we don't know how to read and write. A month can either be 29 days or 30 days. You remember that hadith, right? So that you should look at that to see, well, Rasulullah was aware of the state of his community in terms of literacy, And they didn't have that. Despite that, what does the Quran say? Uktubu. Write it down. And then from that, slowly starts an administration. So if they got prisoners of war, Rasulullah's main question was, can you write? Can you read? Good, then you're free. But you have to come work for us. You can write, you can read, you can write, work for us. You teach him, you teach him, you teach him. You see what's going on? Building up an admin. These are people who start off in the, remember, go back, they start off in Makkah, they have nothing. They have certain skills, but this administrative structure, they don't have that. So those were the building blocks of the admin. So you have the money coming in, now you have to account for it. Now you have to account for it. Until much later, all these empires that were subsumed under the Islamic Empire were governed and managed by the same non-Muslims. The Christians of Damascus administered the empire because they had the skills. It's like you going, you're selling bananas on the side of this road, and then suddenly you take over Maya tomorrow. Your best bet is to do what? Don't do what the Americans did in Iraq. Your best bet is to simply, okay, how much do you get? You have to pretend that you know everything. That's the most important thing. That you understand how this entire supermarket works. And then simply pay those people to do whatever they were doing. And then spend the rest of your time there learning the whole process. That's what they did. They just left people in charge so that they could learn how this process, so that the whole thing doesn't collapse. This you must if you take nothing away from what I'm just saying, then you should at least appreciate that these Arabs had a sense that was remarkable. How did they know that when you take over an empire, you don't touch it? You simply go, at the end of the day, he says, where's the money for the day? Just give me the money, and you put the money and you go. In terms of who opens up, who closes the shop, who does the buying, who does the stocking, who's doing that? The very same people. The very same, because you can't do it. You don't. What was the biggest challenge that, well, let me tell you something now. Do you know that we were knocking on the doors of Vienna twice? Do you know that? Vienna, Austria. Like the cultural capital of Europe, twice under Sulaiman, rahimahullah. The thing that failed us is we lack capacity. Remember the 300 people in Badr? We were always 300 people. We didn't have the manpower. Because to get from Istanbul to Vienna, that's a long walk. You need provisions. You need manpower. You need armaments. You need the fuel depots. You need armament depots. We didn't have that. We tried twice. And whenever I teach my students this class, they're so disappointed. It says, man, one jump and you would have had them. One jump, twice. And then we on the other side, we just gave up. We said, this is, and that was in Spain. In Spain, when we got to the mountains, there was what's it called, Pyrenees, right? Yeah, separating Spain from France. Yes. So we got over there. The Christians were, whenever you take a class on Christian history, this battle is always mentioned. The battle where the Muslims lost. For Muslims who came there, says, this is not worth it. There's nothing going on here. Let's move back. So that's how we didn't get into France. So France and Vienna, we didn't have the manpower for it. So that's always been a limitation for us. What time is Asar? We got 50 minutes. Okay, good. Taxes. You know the most prominent tax in Islam is the zakat, and it is purely Islamic. The other taxes we're going to talk about are a combination. Largely they come from the Qusay side of it. Zakat was not imposed except in Medina. And what makes it very Islamic is its categorization. Up to this day, you ask a Jew, what do you call the Jewish tax? They'll tell you zadaka. Can you hear that? Sadaqah. Zadaka, sadaqah. إنما الصدقات للفقراء والمهاجرين. The ayah of the Quran. So there were similarities to the sadaqah which the Jews gave, but the way in which it was categorized was very unique, and that purely Islamic. That there are 8 categories of people, and that sadaqah should be given to these 8 categories of people. There's one category that has been re-examined today, and may Allah reward those who are re-examining it today. It's wafi sabilillah, and in the path of Allah. So today scholars are saying fi sabilillah means you can give it anywhere. You can give it to a masjid, you can, things like that. But throughout Muslim history, nobody in any madhab, in any school, within Sunniism or outside Sunniism, has ever interpreted the word, the verse fi sabilillah to mean in the path of Allah, like just giving. They all restricted it to giving it in a war effort. If you're going on harb, ma'arika, then you can give it. That's it. That's it. Now we have reinterpreted that, and I've always been opposed to it. I think it's a very bad idea, just for practical reasons. If you take a quick survey of the various religions in the world, and I ask you, of all the religions in the world, which religion has the highest percentage of the needy and the poor? What are you going to tell me? Muslims. You really want to give a masjid that's going to buy a chandelier that costs $100,000 your hard-earned zakat? I'm talking to you as an individual now. I'm not talking to the board. I'm not talking to the imams and the shuyukh who give this fatwa. You want to take your money and you want to give it to the poor people of Syria and Iraq, or you want to give it to people who are going to look at our masajid. MashaAllah, we have palaces. We have palaces. So you decide where you want your money to go. If you're an astute businessman, you say you should go where you're going to have maximum returns. And maximum returns is fuqara, masakin, Ahl Yemen, Ahl Afriqa. So there's a reason why the ulama did that. They said because you have these categories, those are the categories that you should give it to. Fi sabilillah we know fi sabilillah. These are Arabs, and they lived in the time in which everybody understood the Arabic language better than we ever could. And yet they says no, fi sabilillah doesn't mean just openly in the path of Allah. It just means that. The other interesting thing about zakat is zakat was never controlled by the state. Zakat was administered by the ulama, it was collected by the state. And the categories were already put in place, so you couldn't mess with it. 2.5% of your assets, and then the king or the military leader would send out people to the various parts, and they would collect the money and distribute it. But that was the only connection they had. That changed. Now with the new modern state, Sisi controls zakat. Ziaul Haq started that. Well, may Allah deal with him appropriately. And probably with Ziaul, some of them had good intentions. I'm not saying they don't. Maybe they have good intentions. But once the state gets hold of something, you're in trouble. Once the state, I'm making a very important point here, and I want you to, you might not, it might choke you somewhat. The state should not have control over Islam either. It's not like the state should not have control over your zakat, the state should not have control over Islam. We think that when we have a political Islamic government, then mashallah, everything. No. The guy who's sitting on the top, what do you think he's doing? He's manipulating that Islam to suit his political agenda. That's the point. I can't imagine why all of these great leaders of the past 100 years, never saw that perspective. That once Islam is ensconced in his hand, he decides what is Islam and what is not. You see the point? That's the grave danger of having this kind of Islam. You should have an Islamic polity that will decide by way of shura, democracy, whatever it is, what kind of a system you're going to have. But in terms of who sits on the top, bad idea. Iran, thank God for that. They tried it, and everybody's miserable with that Irani ulama government. They don't like it. They don't like it. Because the ulama are the richest people in Iran today. The ulama are the richest people in Iran today. Because they have their hands in the coffers. So our ulama are going to be inoculated. They're not going to be involved in this. Why? Because we're Sunnis? Absolutely not. It's a dangerous business. So 2.5% of your assets. The only person who didn't pay 2.5% was Rasulullah himself. 80% of his assets went for zakat. 80. Not obligation. He was just his. I don't know. Maybe that's something between him and his master. That was between him and his. But up to 80. The books of history tell us up to 80% of Rasulullah's money was given out. So coming back to that image I gave you of Rasulullah being the richest man, he certainly was. But what came just went. Just came and went. Came and went. And we're talking millions and millions of gold dinars and silver coins. Just whatever came, just went. So this is something that he imposed upon himself. Then we had jizya. You heard about jizya. That's a bad word, right? So these are things we have to learn because we are dealing with this. There are books out there that talk about jizya and they're there to demonize you. Not only did they say that Islam is barbaric or Muslims are, astaghfirullah, this is from in the most civilized places of the world, civilized, in Denmark, Muslims are not human. So we have a lot to deal with. So the one way we can, as average people, at least empower ourselves by way of information, knowledge. By way of knowledge. Certainly there was a tax imposed upon non-Muslims, and that is the jizya. You have a question? You pick it up, Leader? But it was reciprocal. We would provide you, you would give us the jizya, and we would provide you with protection. And where they could not provide that protection, they gave back the jizya. Where they could not provide that, they gave back the jizya. We must just know these stories. Umar radiallahu anhu seeing this Jewish person begging, and he says, why is he begging? He can't be. He says, no. We benefited from this man. We benefited from this man when he was by the means. He should now benefit from his own earnings. So he allocated a stipend for him from the Baytul Mal. Unfortunately, that didn't become, it was not institutionalized. But because Omar has did it, we can build on that. Alaykum bi sunnati wa sunnati khulafai ar-rashidin. Omar did it, so we can make a policy. So if you have Copts there, they should be getting, if you have an Islamic form of government, they should be getting from the Baytul Mal. And it's all based on reciprocity. When they were able, they enriched the economy. Now that they're unable, they should benefit from that. So that was jizya. Jizya was not imposed on people of the church, was not imposed on women. It was not imposed on infirm people. So there were exclusions to it. All right? It was also called a progressive tax. So the standard was, so you had the low class, middle class, and the upper class. The low class would be paying a nominal rate. If the low class paid, and I don't mean this in a derogatory sense, but financially, the people who are less by the means, if they were paying $10, the guy on the middle class would be paying $20, and the person on the top would be paying $80. So it was progressive. All right? Okay, so that is good. We're done. Yes. Yes, you're exempt from army duty, and if your services are needed in the army, then your jizya is obviously given back to you. Whereas it's if you look at what some of these people write, then it is as if it's a punitive tax. You know, it's a punishment simply because you are non-Muslim. The jizya falls away. Absolutely. I don't know. You have to speak to the people upstairs about this one. But you see his point, right? The jizya is spent on social affairs, lights, water, electricity. Obviously, no electricity, but you know what I'm saying. So you know, to provide basic utilities. This is what it is. It is an aman that you want to provide safety to these people so they can live in your community. They're free to practice their faith. They are free to have their own taxes within the community. So if there's a Jewish community, they would have taxes so that they can use those taxes to pay to take up for the upkeep of their synagogues. The Christians can use it for churches and so on. And so that was the basic reason for the jizya. Time is up. Okay, jazakumullah.